some economic headlines about what America is facing right now from MSN.com. Salaries get chopped for many Americans who manage to keep jobs. This is like the lamest I told you so I've ever had. Like, did you not see this one coming? Companies across the U.S. are cutting salaries as they fight to survive the coronavirus, upending a key assumption in modern economics and raising another hurdle to rapid recovery. The hard numbers won't be in for months, but anecdotal evidence is piling up. On the earnings calls, big businesses, including the Container Store Group and Lyft, have cited what they say are temporary salary reductions. Federal Reserve officials have also found plenty of supporting evidence. The pandemic has triggered unemployment on a scale not seen since the Great Depression. Pay cuts for Americans who have managed to hold on to their jobs may hobble the return to normal. People will have to use a bigger chunk of their income for fixed obligations such as housing and other debts, leaving less for the kind of spending that can help spark the economy back into life. As Michael Gapin, chief U.S. economist at Barclays PLC in New York, says, it's one of the reasons why we don't expect a so-called V-shaped recovery. Pay cuts might have little and in some cases maybe nothing left over. Americans taking pay cuts might have little and in some cases maybe nothing left over after that for discretionary purchases. So this is a tough time for everybody. Like there's no way around it. You can't lose this much of the economy to a forced unemployment crisis and not have massive repercussions. As you can see in this graph, there's a pretty significant sudden drop off for the aggregate weekly pay, 11% in April, the most on record. Pretty dramatic, right? And so there are the phenomena here that we're calling into question in the article is under the headline, Not So Sticky. That's not supposed to happen, according to ideas that have dominated economics for the better part of a century, since John Maynard Keynes unveiled his famous general theory during the Great Depression. The phenomenon is known as sticky wages. Employers may be able to cut inflation-adjusted pay by raising wages less than prices, the argument goes, but it's harder to cut pay in nominal terms. In other words, by putting a smaller number on people's paychecks. That's why supply and demand get out of balance in a slump, according to the so-called new Keynesian model that Fed officials and other policymakers lean on. It's a justification for governments to intervene with stimulus rather than just allowing market forces to play out until the economy finds a new equilibrium. So it's great. Even in this mainstream article, we're seeing at least an honest assessment. I mean, this is the most honest part. Like, I feel like the author of the story is like working their way to, it's all scam, right? That's why the new Keynesian model, this is according to the so-called new Keynesian model that Fed officials and other policymakers lean on. It's a justification for ripping you off. It's all a scam, and even to have it sort of like hinted to in a mainstream article like this is pretty cool. And that Keynesianism itself is being challenged. Like it took us since most of 100 years to go, oh, hey, yeah, having the government print money in a crisis is, we can't just, and it's not like we as a species just realize. It's way more accurate to say we figured out the racket. Now we figured out that this was a scam. And that's why I'm really excited to see this increased level of awareness. While Congress has authorized some $3 trillion of fiscal spending, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has warned that measures taken to date may not be enough to prevent widespread bankruptcies and prolonged joblessness. Now, this is the guy. We just $3 trillion, another 3 trillion. We're at 9 trillion something right now, right? I mean, these numbers are just so big and abstract as to be irrelevant. I'm basing this because I saw there was the first stimulus that was about 3 trillion, then there was another one, and then in between there was an injection of $3 trillion of liquidity into the banking system. There are probably other, like, lots of other data points I'm not incorporating in this because, like, I don't care to study the knife in my back when I can focus on getting it out. And so Jerome Powell saying that this might not be enough is an admission of the fundamental failure of the system to be able to say, hey, how we have this system where the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer, but our justification for it is that it's necessary to keep you happy and keep your jobs going and keep the supply chains going and keep the grocery store stocked. Well, yeah, we can't keep up the solution any longer. It's yeah, sorry. I guess we might have to give up part of it because the American people are figuring out, like, and how can you not look at this and be like, how do we put up with this shit for so long? Well, I mean, Jerome Powell, like, just, yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah, we're doing all this stuff that's ripping you off, it's making it harder for you. It's not working. Um, but for now, what do we need? Just another $3 trillion, if you don't mind. The pandemic exposes the shortcomings in the new Keynesian model, according to J.W. Mason, an assistant professor of economics at City University of New York. The real takeaway from Keynes is that pay cuts only drive the economy further from, not closer to, full employment. The source of unemployment in a crisis like this is a lack of aggregate demand. He said pay cuts are only going to make that worse. More economic headlines to roll into this segment. Everyone is shocked. CBS News hit hard by layoffs. This is from HollywoodReporter.com. And I mentioned, the challenges here for independent media, right? I mean, even for us, like, and I think about for political campaigns, if you're not sure if you're going to have a job next month or if you're going to get a pay cut, you're not donating to political campaigns. What this does is has a huge effect, deleterious effect on the balancing value of grassroots fundraising efforts versus grass tops, corporate assholes bribing politicians fundraising efforts. And so the consolidation of power towards Donald Trump and Joe Biden at the expense of grassroots candidates like Libertarian Joe Jorgensen, obviously, we're going to be at an even bigger disadvantage this year as libertarians. From the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot are going to have challenges funding their races. Independent media like us, I'm really grateful for YouTube as the mechanism by which you're able to give us a super chat, and for as little as $1 jump to the top of our comment stream. I'm grateful for Patreon.com that people are able to subscribe and support the show, and that we're able to build something right now independently of that. But this is something that we know is harder than it's ever been, even for us, which makes us all the more grateful to have an active and engaged audience supporting what we do here. And I'm kind of like, a little bit of the Schadenfreude in me is tickled by this CBS story. Like, oh yes, ye old corporate media and your fragile models dependent on this old system. Yeah, did your banking overlords forget to include you in this shakeup now? Like, are you getting cut out of the big racket? Well, excuse me for gloating, but after having established Adam versus the Man so well in the sort of golden age of internet independent media, and then getting demonetized and censored so much over the last few years, world's smallest violin playing for every mainstream media outlet going out of business due to coronaphobia. CBS News was hit hard by a round of corporate cost cutting that saw a single-digit percentage of the network's news staffers laid off, according to an estimate given by network president Susan Zirinsky during a Wednesday afternoon all-hands conference. Now, I kind of want to get out the whiteboard again here. I'm going to do it. If I say that, I'm going to do it. Because the layoffs are, something that happens as a consequence. And I'm going to draw the cliff here, okay? That, like, if employment is kind of trucking along and then falls off a cliff, right? And this is the point. And yeah, it's not a perfect vertical. I get it. But you'll see where I'm going with this. In that when employment is trucking along, there's a sudden vertical drop off when government shuts down bars and restaurants and other non-essential businesses where it's just like, oh, you had a job? Sorry, not anymore. Especially if it's tips based, strippers, bartenders, servers, especially affected by this. But then even here, there's a tumble effect, you know, where, oh, all those people lost their jobs. Well, now I have to lose my job, and I have to lose my job, and I have to. So there's this cascading effect that, of unemployment that we're still experiencing as a follow-on to this. And CBS is kind of downstream from that, right? Like when we fell off the cliff up here, CBS didn't go. They didn't have to let off anybody, right? They still had advertiser contracts. They still had cash on hand. But now that we're here and they're going, oh shit, this is our advertisers laying off people who aren't restaurants and bars. And that means now our revenue is going to come down and they're going to have to adjust to that. And it's finally when it gets to here, you get to the point where CBS goes, okay, shit, time to lay people off. And even if the recovery from this kind of creeps up, for companies like CBS that are responding to this decline, there's going to be a whole other wave of pay cuts and unemployment following from this that we need to be looking out for. And no matter how much money they print, these mechanisms of building these organizations back to get these, you can't just, the myth of the V-shaped recovery was, well, we can just, we just have a sector of the economy, take some time off and then get back to work and everything will be back to normal, right? It's like, no, we're not that smart. We haven't set things up that well yet. We don't have the insurance mechanisms in place. We don't have the organization in place. We don't have, and even now, just because we have government, we don't have the ability in place to compensate, to adjust, to adapt, and overcome, because we still have to deal with government regulations and enforcement of taxes, all of this stuff. Based on the size of the news network, which totals more than 500 staffers, employees did the back of the envelope math and estimated that about 50 staffers were cut, though the network has not specifically said how many were affected. So the next story from AJC.com, another important economic data point coming from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. From the manager, full airport recovery could take 2 to 5 years. So the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport is starting to see a slight uptick in passengers amid the coronavirus pandemic, but a full recovery could still be years away. Airport General Manager John Selden told an Atlanta City Council committee Wednesday that gross revenue from concessions and rental cars at the airport declined by nearly $42 million in the January to March quarter compared with the year earlier. The decline reflected just the first weeks of the pandemic. Again, cascading effects. People being afraid to travel means people are going to fly less. It's not just the airlines, it's the airports. It's all the downstream businesses that are connected to concession at the airports, to retail at the airports, and on and on and on. The economy is not, a machine with levers that you can just pull and operate and swap out at will. It is a far more complex machine than anybody could possibly centrally plan. And to hear them actually going to the Atlanta City Council, like, oh yes, turn to government. And we are suffering because we have allowed government to control so much of the economy that even coming back from something like this, when the American people, we are generally ready. I mean, most people are comfortable going back to restaurants with no precautions already. So would I. If I had a reason to go to a restaurant, wouldn't hold me back at all. And you would think that, it would be obvious. I hope it's obvious by now. But that we have why does flying suck? Like what? Well, there's a ton of government involved. No shit. First of all, hello, TSA. It's not that we shouldn't have security or accept that, hey, security just has to be this way. No, it's because of government. If airports were or airlines were handling security, or private airports were handling security, it would be fine. Why are airports such miserable experiences with parking and traffic and loops and bad signs and getting lost? It's because you're driving around a government facility. Duh. And if it wasn't for the government monopoly on airports, and it's not a perfect monopoly, I know, but enough that they have a quasi-monopoly by licensing and having the biggest commercial airports are all government airports. Well, gee, why do you think that happens? You know, there's a racket here to pour, you know, millions of tons of cement and all over these buildings, these monstrosities. If airlines were forced to pay for airports themselves, they'd be smaller, local, way more convenient. You'd be able to drive up to the airplane and park and walk from the parking lot to the plane, and it would be, the convenience would be unreal compared to what we have today. Why like that airport lounges are even a thing. And then the oligopoly of the airline industry itself that makes it way more difficult for any corporate competition to come in and edge out any of these existing businesses by providing better service to customers. You can't do it. Why does flying suck? Because of government. And so anyway, to the story. Since then, more concessions have suspended operations. About 310 of the airport's 347 concessions are now closed. After the airport shuttered concourses B and E and parts of concourses C and T in response to airlines cutting as much as 85% of their flights. Passenger counts declined as much as 97% at the lowest point in April, but have recovered slightly to about an 88% decline year over year. We expect this to continue as people feel more comfortable traveling, Sullivan said. But when? So he says next year, maybe we'll be at half the level from before the pandemic. I hope that's not being too optimistic. It could be. So finally, in our economic news today, from tunesnanews.com, an avalanche of evictions could be bearing down on America's renters. Again, just another huge, tragic ripple effect in all of this. The United States, already wrestling with an economic collapse not seen in a generation, is facing a wave of evictions as government relief payments and legal protections run out for millions of out-of-work Americans who have little financial cushion and few choices when looking for new housing. The hardest hit are tenants who had low incomes and little savings even before the pandemic and whose housing costs ate up more of their paychecks. They were also more likely to work in industries where job losses have been particularly severe. Temporary government assistance has helped, as have government orders that put evictions on hold in many cities, but evictions will soon be allowed in about half of the states, according to Emily A. Benford, a housing expert and associate professor at Columbia Law School, who is tracking eviction policies. We are just beginning to experience the repercussions of this. You want to talk about a second wave and a third wave and a fourth wave? It's not the virus. It's the wave of spasming government that hits over and over and over again, with consequences from the economic shutdown and the economic manipulation that is consolidating wealth and power extremely effectively. The first wave is the forced unemployment crisis. It's like the first layer. This might be like the 7 plagues, right? First, we have the unemployment crisis. Then we have the retail crisis. Then we have the corporate layoff crisis. Then we have the eviction and homelessness crisis. Then we have the real food crisis. And then we have the final government crisis, a full takeover of the economy. We can't let that happen. We can't let it get to that point. I don't think it will, but do not underestimate the plague of government economic intervention that we are experiencing right now.